Don't get into that car. If you leave today, you will never return. A 10-year-old boy suddenly pulled my hand back, just as I was stepping out of the villa on Monday morning. The familiar car was still waiting outside the gate. The driver standing beside it looked exactly the same as any other day. I frowned. What are you talking about? But as the screen lit up, the sounds that echoed out left me completely paralyzed. Thank you for being here with me. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been helped by someone you least expected? I read every comment you leave, and your voice matters here. A quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized for impact and reflection. What matters most is the message it carries. The boy's whispered command, "Don't move, follow me," stopped me in the middle of my own driveway. I was 71 years old, that Monday morning briefcase in hand, mind already on the boardroom meeting, scheduled for 9:30. At 71, I looked like exactly what I claimed to be a small-time logistics consultant who drove a modest sedan and lived in his wife's house. The June sun was already warm on my shoulders. The car waited at the gate driver standing beside it in his usual dark jacket. Everything was ordinary. Then the boy appeared from behind the rose bushes. He was 10 years old, wearing a faded blue shirt, 2 sizes too large, with eyes that carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept all night. I recognized him vaguely. Celeste's son, the housekeeper's boy, but we'd never spoken more than polite hellos in passing. "Sir," he whispered, his small hand gripping my sleeve with surprising strength. "Please, sir, don't let the man at the gate see you." I almost pulled away. I'd built a life on logic, on schedules that didn't bend for inconvenience or childish games. But something in his voice, the tremor underneath the urgency, made me pause. "What are you talking about?" I kept my voice low, matching his whisper without knowing why. "If you go to that car, you won't come back." His grip tightened. "I heard them say it last night in the kitchen. They said your name 3 times, Mr. Garrison, and they said your wife paid them already. Half last week, half when it was done." The morning stopped. Not the sounds, the birds still sang. The distant traffic still hummed from the road beyond our gate. But the feeling of the morning, the ordinary mundaneness of it, ceased to exist. "Who said this?" My voice came out calmer than the sudden hammering in my chest. "The man who came to see her Thursday night. And Mrs. Garrison." He wouldn't meet my eyes now. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was getting water from the pantry, and I heard them through the door. They didn't know I was there. I looked toward the seat. The driver stood beside the town car, same height and build as Glenn, my regular driver for 8 years. But Glenn wore a silver ring on his left thumb. Always. I'd seen it 1,000 times when he held the door. This man's hands were bare. "Come with me," the boy said. "Please, I can prove it." He led me not toward the house's main entrance, but around the side through the service door I'd used maybe twice in the 26 years I'd lived here. Down a narrow hallway that smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Into a small room I'd never entered, barely larger than a closet, with a security monitor that showed 6 different angles of the property. The boy pulled a phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked, taped at the corner with clear packing tape that had yellowed with age. "I recorded it," he said. "Last night, through the door." He pressed play. My wife's voice filled the small room. Warm and calm, the same voice I'd heard across the dinner table for 26 years. The same voice that said good morning and asked about my day and discussed the weather with the practiced ease of long marriage. "It has to look ordinary," she said on the recording. "He has to get in the car himself. If anything looks forced, the police will find it within a day." A man's voice responded. Deeper, slower, methodical, someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times before. "He will," the man said. 8:30 is his window. He never varies. The car will stop at the reservoir bend. The rest happens after. And the driver, Glenn called in sick this morning. Fake doctor's note went to the service company an hour ago. They'll send the replacement I specified. He won't ask questions. 11 minutes and 42 seconds. I would listen to all of it. Lorraine's voice continued with the same warmth she used when ordering groceries or planning dinner parties. The policy pays out after 7 months. Accidental death, double indemnity. $70 million. I'm the only beneficiary. That's why the staging matters, the man said. Water accident. Disoriented driver. Car goes off the low bridge at the bend. Reservoir is deep there. Recovery takes 3, maybe 4 days. Plenty of time for evidence to wash clean. You've done this before? Yes, the man said simply. Phoenix 2 years ago, Montana before that. Both looked exactly like what they were supposed to look like. Both paid out within 8 months. And if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. He gets in the car at 8:30. He always does. Briefcase Monday suit mind on his meeting. He won't notice Glenn's replacement until it's too late, if he notices at all. The recording continued. Details about timing, about the route, about how the replacement driver had been paid half up front, $25,000, with the remainder due upon confirmation. Lorraine's voice never wavered, never hesitated. Discussed my death with the same practical efficiency she brought to renovating the guest bathroom last fall. I listened to it once. Then I pressed replay and listened from the beginning, my lungs stopping and restarting, the way they do when receiving catastrophic news in boardroom meetings. The kind that means layoffs, bankruptcy, the end of something you thought was permanent. When it finished the second time, I stood in that small room with its cheap monitor and its smell of dust and old electronics, and I felt the entire shape of my life shifting underneath me like a floor that had just stopped being solid. The boy Silas. I remembered now his name was Silas. Mercer's watched me with those sleepless eyes. 10 years old and carrying the weight of this terrible knowledge alone. How long had he held it? Since last night, since he'd crept back to his room and understood what he'd heard. I looked down at him at the cracked phone still in his small hand and asked the only question that mattered. How do you know what you heard? My voice came out quiet, measured. How do you know it was about me? He met my eyes then, direct, unflinching. Because she said your name, he whispered. Mrs. Garrison said Leland leaves at 8:20 every Monday. He'll be in the driveway at 8:25. He never varies. And the man said, then Leland Garrison will be dead by 9. The boy's answer changed everything. His answer left no room for doubt. But I had spent 40 years in boardrooms where people lied with the same conviction as truth. The recording was only half the proof. I needed something I could verify with my own eyes. Stay here, I told Silas. I moved to the hallway window that overlooked the front gate, positioning myself behind the curtain where I could see without being seen. The morning light fell across the driveway in clean geometric patterns. The town car waited, engine running. The driver stood beside it in the same dark jacket, same posture Glenn maintained during those inevitable delays, one hand resting on the door handle, the other checking his phone. Glenn Wolfe had been my driver for 8 years. We'd shared enough early mornings and late evenings that I knew his habits the way you know. The rhythms of people you see every day but never truly befriend. He drank his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar. He hummed old jazz standards under his breath when traffic was bad. And he wore a silver ring on his left thumb, always without exception. His father had given it to him the week before he died. Glenn told me the story at last year's Christmas party after I'd made some thoughtless joke about it looking like a high school class ring. I'd felt immediately embarrassed for joking. He'd been gracious about it, but the weight of what that ring meant had been clear in his voice. Glenn wore that ring washing dishes, fixing his car, driving in winter weather when his hands swelled. He never took it off. The man at the gate had no ring on either hand. I studied him for another 30 seconds. Same height, same build, similar haircut. Someone had done their research. Someone had chosen a replacement who would pass a casual glance from someone already distracted by morning routine and boardroom preparation. But they'd missed the small details, the intimate ones, the kind of details you only notice when you've spent years in proximity to someone. A small detail, last year's Christmas party, and the entire architecture of my life revealed as something else. I turned from the window. Silas stood in the doorway watching me with those sleepless eyes. "The ring," I said quietly. "Glenn never takes off his ring. That man has nothing on his hands." Silas nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "There's more," he said. "If you want to see, show me." He led me through the house with the confidence of someone who'd spent his childhood learning its hidden roots, the paths staff took to remain invisible, while the owners pretended the house ran itself. We moved along the south wall past the library, past the sitting room, until we reached the corner where jasmine climbed thick and wild. Silas stopped, pointed. Through the flowering vines thick enough to hide us thin enough to see through, I saw the outdoor terrace. The marble table where Lorraine took her morning tea when the weather was pleasant. She sat there now, tablet in front of her, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. Through the jasmine bushes, I saw my wife of 26 years, elegant, even in the morning light, silver hair pulled back in the way she'd worn it, since I'd known her moving with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting her role. She wore the light blue dress I'd bought on our Florence trip 2 summers ago, the one she'd held up in the boutique window and said was too beautiful for every day. The one she'd folded carefully in tissue paper when we returned home and said she'd save for something special. Across from her sat a man, tall and lean somewhere in his early 40s, with carefully maintained hair and the easy confidence of someone who had perfected the art of being trusted. Gray coat despite the June warmth. He leaned back in his chair the way people do when they're comfortable when they've spent enough time in a place to stop performing. Lorraine's voice carried across the lawn, warm and certain. "Everything will be finished by tonight." The man Julian, the voice from the recording, responded without urgency. "And then we wait. Patience is what makes this work." "How long?" 7 months. Exactly what we discussed. The policy pays out, investigation closes, suspicion fades. Then we're free. Lorraine lifted her teacup, sipped, set it down with the delicate precision she brought to every gesture. "Free," she repeated as if tasting the word. "Strange how freedom costs so much." "Only if you get caught," Julian said. He smiled, small, controlled. "We won't get caught." I watched her nod, watched her reach across the table and touch his hand briefly, intimately. The kind of gesture that spoke of familiarity, of time spent together when I wasn't there, of a relationship that existed in the spaces I didn't see. The light blue dress from Florence. She'd saved it for something special. Silas stood beside me, barely breathing. 10 years old and watching the collapse of the world he'd known. The household where his mother worked. The people he'd been taught to respect and serve. All of it shifting into something else. I felt it too. Like watching a photograph of yourself slowly catch fire from the corner inward. The image stays clear even as it burns. You can still see what it was supposed to be, right up until the moment it isn't anymore. Lorraine stood, smoothed her dress, picked up the tablet. Julian rose with her, and they walked together toward the east wing of the house, toward the guest suite where I realized with sudden clarity he must have been staying. Where he'd been staying for how long, days, weeks. Their voices faded. The terrace stood empty. The morning continued its ordinary progression, as if nothing had changed. Silas said nothing. Neither did I. We both turned and walked back along the wall, past the fountain, with its marble nymphs, past the bench where Lorraine used to read in the afternoons, into the darkness of the house that suddenly felt like a stage set beautiful and hollow, and designed for performances I'd never understood I was watching. I had seen enough. The recording, the missing ring, the outdoor meeting in the Florence dress. Every piece of evidence pointing toward the same impossible truth. Now I had to act, and I knew exactly who to call first. I closed the door to my private office, the small one off the west hallway, with accounting ledgers on metal shelves and an old computer that ran spreadsheet software from 2015, and picked up the phone to call the one man who would believe me without needing proof. Vernon Caldwell, 58, had been my attorney for 19 years and could read the weight in my voice the way other men read contracts. I'd used a particular tone exactly twice before in all those years. Once when a corporate acquisition went catastrophically wrong in ways that threatened criminal exposure. Once when my first wife died and the insurance company suggested the timing looked convenient. Both times Vernon had heard that tone and moved immediately without requiring explanation. I dialed his direct line. He picked up on the second ring. Vernon Caldwell. It's Leland. Silence for 2 seconds. He was hearing it, the controlled flatness, the absence of social preamble, the weight underneath the calm. Go ahead, he said. I'm listening. No questions about my morning. No pleasantries about the weather. Just immediate readiness for whatever had triggered the voice he recognized. I recounted everything in 12 controlled minutes. The boy appearing from the rose bushes. The 11-minute recording of Lorraine and a man named Julian discussing my death by tonight. The missing silver ring on the fake driver's hand. The scene through the jasmine bushes, my wife in the Florence dress, discussing timelines and freedom and patience with a man who had perfected the art of murder twice before. I spoke with the same discipline I used for catastrophic boardroom news. No emotion, just facts delivered in sequence with timestamps and verifiable details. Vernon had taught me years ago that panic obscures but precision clarifies. When I finished, he was silent for 5 seconds. The recording, he said finally. You have it. The boy has it, on his phone. And you verified the driver isn't Glenn. The ring. Glenn never removes it. I've known him 8 years. This morning I know him better than I know my wife. Another silence. I could hear Vernon thinking the same sound I'd heard 19 years ago when we first met, that quality of absolute focus that meant he was already 3 moves ahead. Personal assets, he said. You still have the offshore accounts under the structure we set up in 2018. Yes, she knows about them. She thinks she does. She thinks there's 40 million. 19 years. 2 times before this I'd used that voice. Vernon had heard it and moved mountains both times. Now I was asking him to move them again. There's more, I said quietly. How much more? 350 million. The silence lasted longer this time. Not shock Vernon had handled fortunes large enough that numbers stopped surprising him years ago, but calculation. Understanding what this meant. Why someone would plan murder for what they thought was 40 million, when the real number was nearly 9 times larger. She doesn't know, Vernon said. Not a question. No one knows except you, me, and the accountants in Geneva. I've kept it that way for reasons that are becoming clear. Can you move that fast? I asked. 90 minutes, Vernon said without hesitation. I'll freeze the personal assets, trigger the contingency protocols we established, and file preliminary documents with the court. Stay where you are. Don't leave the house. Don't confront anyone. I'll call when it's done. He hung up before I could thank him. I sat for 30 seconds, with the phone still in my hand, feeling the first small measure of relief. Someone believed me. Someone with the power to act was already moving. I wasn't alone in this anymore. But there was one more call to make. I dialed the number from memory. It rang 4 times before Otis Ramsey picked up. 60 years old shipping billionaire who'd built his fortune over 3 decades, moving freight across oceans with the kind of precision that made him legendary. We'd known each other 15 years through overlapping business circles and had scheduled a fishing trip this morning, one of those standing appointments that filled the social calendar of semi-retired men with too much time. Leland, Otis said, warmth in his voice. You calling from the dock already? I'm 10 minutes out. I can't make the trip today, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Something urgent came up. Don't call the house number. The warmth disappeared. Otis had spent decades reading the spaces between words. The tone that meant a shipment was lost, a contract had fallen through. Something fundamental had changed. I see, he said after a brief pause. Everything all right? No. Another pause. Longer. Do you need me? The question was simple, direct, and carried the weight of 15 years of mutual respect. Otis was asking if this was the kind of urgent that required money lawyers' influence or muscle. He was offering all of it without needing details. I considered for 3 seconds. Not yet, I said. But remember this call. Remembered, Otis said. You know where to find me. He hung up. I set the phone down and looked out the window of my small office. Outside, the Monday morning continued its ordinary progression. A mother pushed a double stroller down the sidewalk, talking on her phone. The hardware store on the corner was unlocking its doors. A delivery truck double-parked outside the bakery, while the driver carried in morning bread. I found Silas still sitting in the security room, where everything had started, the cracked phone resting in his small hands like evidence he couldn't put down. He looked up when I entered, those sleepless eyes studying my face for signals about what came next. 10 years old, and already learning to read adults the way survivors do, watching for the truth underneath the words. I closed the door behind me and knelt until my eyes were level with his. It was the first time I'd done this with a child since I was one myself. Somewhere in the decades between, I'd forgotten how to speak to someone whose world was still supposed to be safe. Listen carefully, I said quietly. In a few minutes, you're going to tell your mother your stomach hurts. Not badly. Just enough that you need to lie down in your room. You're going to stay there until I come get you. He nodded, serious and attentive. Don't tell anyone what you heard on that recording, I continued. Not even your mother. Not because she did anything wrong, but because the more people who know, the more people are in danger. Do you understand? Another nod. But his eyes had changed, something darker moving behind them. Do you still trust her? He asked. The question stopped me cold. Not asking if I trusted Lorraine. Asking if I still trusted Celeste. His mother. The woman who had worked in this house for how many years? Who had raised this boy in the margins of someone else's wealth? Who might or might not know what her employer was planning? How do you tell a 10-year-old that you might not trust his mother without destroying the only safety he has left? I don't know, I said finally. The truth, because he'd earned it. I don't know who I can trust except you and the man I called on the phone. So we protect each other by being careful, by not telling anyone anything until we're sure. He absorbed this with the same terrible maturity he'd shown all morning. A child forced to become something else because the adults around him had failed at being trustworthy. Okay, he whispered. I stood my knees protesting the movement. 71 years old, kneeling on a floor that smelled of dust and old electronics, making promises to a 10-year-old that I wasn't certain I could keep. Go now, I said. Remember stomachache. Not serious, just enough. He slipped past me without another word, moving with that practiced invisibility children learn when they grow up in other people's houses. I watched him go, carrying his cracked phone and his impossible knowledge, and wondered if I'd just made him safer or more vulnerable. The phone rang while I was still standing in the hallway. Lorraine's name appeared on the screen. My wife of 26 years calling from somewhere in this house, checking on the husband she'd arranged to have killed. Not answering would reveal too much. But answering required flawless acting, the kind of performance I'd spent a lifetime perfecting in boardrooms and at dinner parties, smiling while calculating exactly how much truth to reveal. I watched it ring twice. On the third ring, I pressed the green circle. Hello? Her voice came through warm and patient, with that slight note of amused concern that wives use when husbands do something predictably forgetful. Darling, where are you? The driver just texted me. He says you haven't come out yet. The driver. The fake one. The man standing at our gate waiting to drive me to a reservoir bend where I would stop being a person and become a problem that had been solved. I came back inside, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm, apologetic but not worried. The tone of someone whose biggest concern was a minor schedule disruption. I forgot the Henderson folder for the meeting. I'm in the study looking for it now. I'll be out in 2 minutes. Do you need help finding it? Her voice carried that practiced solicitude the offer made, knowing it would be refused, but made anyway to demonstrate care. No, I've got it. Just took me a minute to remember which cabinet. All right. A pause. Then with perfect wifely affection, hurry, darling, I'm worried. Those 2 words, I'm worried. I'd heard them 1,000 times across 26 years. Heard them when I worked late. Heard them when I traveled for business. Heard them in the particular tone that meant she cared, that she was thinking of me, that I mattered to her in the way spouses matter to each other after decades of shared life. The same words, the same voice. But meaning had split like light through a prism into something I'd never seen before. She wasn't worried I'd forgotten a folder. She was worried I wasn't dead yet. Worried the driver was texting to say the target hadn't appeared. Worried her carefully constructed plan was encountering an unexpected delay. I'll be right there, I said, matching her warmth with my own. Playing the role I'd been playing for 26 years without knowing it was a role. 2 minutes, I promise. I'll let him know, she said. I love you. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the hallway holding the phone, listening to the silence where her voice had been. 3 words she'd said every day for 26 years. 3 words that had meant comfort and partnership and the ordinary rhythms of long marriage. 3 words that now meant nothing, or worse, meant something I couldn't bear to translate. I ended the call and stood perfectly still in the hallway for 30 seconds, the way I always did when receiving catastrophic news in boardrooms, taking the moment to compose myself before anyone could see what it had cost me. The habit of a lifetime spent hiding what I felt until I could afford to feel it. Then I straightened my tie, picked up my briefcase from where I'd set it down an hour ago, when the world was still operating under rules I understood. Checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, composed, professional, unhurried. I walked toward the front door where a man was waiting to kill me. Everything depended on what happened in the next 60 seconds. The morning was bright when I stepped out the front door, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, looking exactly like a man whose mind was already 3 hours ahead in a boardroom. The June sunshine felt sharper than an hour ago. I could see individual leaves on the maple trees, hear a lawnmower, 3 houses down, smell fresh-cut grass and faint exhaust from the idling town car at our gate. 30 feet away, the fake driver stood beside the car. Same dark jacket, same posture, but relaxed in a way Glenn never was, leaning against the passenger door, looking at his phone, utterly confident. No tension, no alertness. Just practiced ease of someone whose job was almost finished. That confidence told me everything about how they'd planned this. They'd assumed I was predictable, unseeing. A man who walked the same route every Monday, mind on spreadsheets, never looking closely at people whose job was to remain invisible. They'd assumed I was already defeated. Across the street, Mrs. Brennan was watering her garden in a blue summer dress. The picture of a normal Monday morning that had no idea what was happening 30 feet away. Her roses were blooming early this year. I started walking at normal pace, eyes on phone scrolling through nothing. My thumb moved across the screen and practiced gestures that meant nothing. 30 feet to the car. The distance I'd walked every Monday for years without thinking. 25 feet. The fake driver looked up, straightened slightly, reached for the door handle in preparation for the ritual we'd performed hundreds of times. 20 feet. I could see details I'd never noticed with Glenn. The way this man's jacket bunched at the shoulder, suggesting a holster. The way his eyes tracked my approach with professional assessment rather than familiar patience. the way his left hand stayed close to his pocket. 15 feet, 10 degrees. The angle between continuing to live and climbing into my own carefully planned death. I shifted direction, not abruptly, not with sudden movement that would signal awareness or fear, just a slight adjustment in trajectory, the kind of minor course correction people make 100 times a day without thinking. A man avoiding a puddle, a man whose attention was elsewhere. I raised the phone to my ear, in the same fluid motion, pressing the screen as if answering a call. "Yes, I'm walking out now," I said into the silent phone voice carrying just loud enough. Annoyed but professional. "No, I'll meet you at the corner. The driveway is blocked." The fake driver's posture changed. The door handle remained unpulled. His weight shifted forward slightly, body language asking a question he hadn't been prepared to voice. I kept walking, 10 degrees to the left of where I'd been heading, toward the small pedestrian gate we used for garden access and neighborhood walks. The gate that hadn't been part of anyone's plan. "Mr. Garrison," his voice carried uncertainty. Not alarm yet. Just confusion. The hesitation of someone whose instructions had been clear and were now encountering a variable no one had mentioned. I didn't turn, didn't acknowledge, just continued my fabricated phone conversation. "I understand that, but the town car service sent someone to block our driveway this morning, and I can't—" I let my voice rise slightly. "Yes, corner of Maple and 3rd. I'll be there in 2 minutes, 10 feet from the pedestrian gate." The morning continued around us. Mrs. Brennan's hose creating small rainbows, the lawnmower droning steady, a delivery truck turning onto our street. The fake driver took 2 steps toward me. Not running, not aggressive, just movement born of confusion. "Mr. Garrison, I'm your driver this morning. Glenn called in sick, but the service sent me." I reached the gate, pushed it open with my shoulder while still holding the phone briefcase in my other hand. The hinges squeaked a sound I'd heard 1,000 times and never thought about until this moment, when it became the sound of a door closing on one version of my life and opening on another. "I understand, but I've already arranged alternate transport," I said into the phone voice, fading as I stepped through. "Yes, I'll see you in 2 minutes." Through the gate, onto the sidewalk along the side of our property, out of direct line of sight, out of the carefully constructed box they'd built around this morning. I didn't stop, didn't look back. A man who knows he's going in the right direction doesn't need to confirm what he's leaving behind. Behind me, I heard the fake driver's voice one more time, louder now, edged with something that might have been alarm finally catching up to confusion. "Mr. Garrison." I turned the corner. The sound disappeared behind hedges and distance, and the fundamental shift in reality that happens when a target stops being a target and becomes something else entirely. I walked 2 blocks before I let my pace slow. Found a quiet corner where a delivery truck was double parked, its driver inside a shop, the vehicle creating a temporary wall between me and the street behind. I stopped there, pressed my back against warm brick. My hands were shaking. My breathing came faster than the easy walk should have required. My heart hammered against my ribs with delayed recognition of what my mind had known, but my body hadn't processed. I had just escaped my own murder by the width of 10 degrees and the audacity of a fabricated phone call. The private dock was exactly where I'd left it, small forgotten, tucked behind weathered boathouses, where no one came anymore. And when I sat down in the boat, my hands finally began to shake. Not the controlled tremor I'd allowed myself 2 blocks from home. This was different. Deeper. The kind of shaking that comes from somewhere beneath conscious control, from the part of the body that understands what the mind hasn't fully processed yet. I was alone for the first time since Silas had grabbed my sleeve 4 hours ago. Alone with the smell of lake water and damp wood, and morning sunlight reflecting off small waves. Alone with what had almost happened, and what was still happening, and what I didn't know yet. I let my hands shake. This wasn't a boardroom. No one was watching. No one needed me to be composed or strategic or 3 moves ahead. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I could afford to let the facade crack. 4 hours ago, I was walking to a car. Now I was sitting in a boat, because my wife had paid someone to kill me. The sentence kept repeating in my head, with the same surreal quality as the recording had. Words that made perfect sense individually, but assembled themselves into something impossible. My wife. Paid someone. Kill me. I had spent 40 years never letting anyone see me afraid. Now I was alone and I could finally afford to be. I pulled out my phone, dialed Vernon's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Where can we meet?" I asked without preamble. "Somewhere away from here. 30 minutes. Small cafe on Chapel Street in New Haven," he said immediately. "Corner table. I'll already be there." He hung up before I could respond. Vernon had always understood the economy of words in crisis. I sat in the boat for another 5 minutes, letting the shaking run its course, watching the water lap against old pilings, listening to distant traffic and seagulls and the ordinary sounds of a Monday morning that had stopped being ordinary the moment a 10-year-old boy appeared from behind rose bushes. Then I stood, brushed off my suit, and walked back to solid ground. The cafe was small and nearly empty at 10:15. Vernon sat at the corner table in the same plain dark suit he wore to every meeting, whether it cost $10 or 10 million, a leather folder already open in front of him. 2 coffees waited, one on each side of the table. I slid into the seat across from him. He didn't ask how I was, didn't waste time on pleasantries or reassurance, just pushed the folder toward me. "I froze the personal assets 90 minutes ago," he said. "Filed preliminary documents with the court under seal. But you need to see this first." He spread 3 pages across the table like evidence at a trial. "Your life insurance policy. Original coverage $4 million, raised to $8 million 11 years ago when you restructured the estate. Standard adjustment for someone with your assets." He tapped the second page. "First Amendment 8 years ago. Coverage increased to $18 million. I was in the room when you signed it. Estate planning session at my office. You made a joke about Lorraine finally having a reason to keep you alive." I remembered. We'd all laughed. Vernon, me, the estate planner whose name I'd forgotten. The dark humor of wealthy people discussing their own mortality. Vernon tapped the third page. Second Amendment. 14 months ago. Coverage increased to 35 million base. Double indemnity clause for accidental death brings it to 70 million. All protection clauses removed, no investigation period, no contestability window, no requirement for second opinion on cause of death. Sole beneficiary, Leland Garrison. He looked at me with the steady gaze I'd seen 19 years ago when we first met. "Where were you the last week of January 14 months ago?" I closed my eyes. Tried to remember. "January, 14 months ago. Winter conference season. Singapore," I said finally. "Asian Supply Chain Conference. 5 days. I was there the entire week." "You're certain?" "Yes." I gave the keynote address on supply chain resilience. Stayed through the entire conference because the networking was worth more than the sessions. Vernon nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Look at the signature," he said quietly. I looked. My signature. My distinctive spiral. A document I had never seen until this moment. The spiral at the end was perfect. The same unconscious flourish I'd been making since law school, when a professor had told me my handwriting was too plain, and I'd added the spiral out of sheer undergraduate rebellion. 48 years of muscle memory captured in ink on a page I'd never touched. "That's my signature," I said. The words came out flat, factual, but I never signed this. "I know," Vernon said, "because you were in Singapore when this was notarized. And because when you sign insurance documents, you date them in the margin. You've done it for every policy I've ever witnessed. Force of habit from your corporate days." He was right. I always dated insurance documents in the margin, day, month, year, in small, precise numbers. A habit so ingrained I didn't think about it anymore. The signature on the page had no date. Someone forged this, I said. Not just someone, Vernon replied. Someone who had access to multiple samples of your signature. Someone who knew your handwriting well enough to recreate the spiral. Someone who understood insurance documentation well enough to know what would pass initial review. Someone who lived with me, who saw my signature on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the thousand small documents of daily life. I looked at the signature for a long time, the spiral at the end that I'd made unconsciously, since law school, now forged onto a document designed to fund my murder. Vernon tapped the notary stamp at the bottom of the page. "This is only page 3, he said quietly. "Wait until you see where this was notarized." Vernon opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me, the notary's archived record complete with the Stamford address where my forged signature had been witnessed 14 months ago. I stared at the screen. A small office on Bedford Street. I'd driven past it 100 times without noticing. The kind of place that handled routine notarizations for real estate closings and power of attorney documents. Utterly ordinary. Completely forgettable. "The notary's name is Gerald Fowler," Vernon said. "Retired 4 months ago. Moved to Arizona. Hasn't answered his phone in 2 weeks." I felt something cold settle in my chest. The pattern was becoming clear. The fake driver who would disappear after the reservoir accident. The notary who had already disappeared before anyone could question him about the signature he'd supposedly witnessed. They'd been cleaning up their trail before I was even dead. "So the evidence is gone," I said. Vernon shook his head. "A small movement, but definitive. That's what they thought," he said. "But Connecticut state law requires all notaries to submit archive copies of notarized documents to the state agency, regardless of retirement or relocation. It's a consumer protection measure, prevents exactly this kind of disappearing act." He pulled up another screen. Official state letterhead. A scanned document with my signature and the notary's stamp. "The archives are still intact," Vernon continued. "They show the document was signed and notarized on January 28, 2023. 2:15 in the afternoon according to the timestamp, January 28th. I closed my eyes trying to remember. Singapore. The conference ran from January 25th through the 30th. I'd given the keynote on the 27th. The 28th had been networking sessions and a dinner with potential partners. "I was in Singapore that entire week," I said. "I didn't leave the country until the 30th. Vernon nodded. "I know. I already pulled your passport records. Entry visa stamped January 25th at Changi Airport. Exit visa stamped January 30th. Conference registration shows you attended sessions on the 26th, 27th, and 28th. He turned the laptop back toward himself, fingers moving across the keyboard. "You were 8,000 miles away when you supposedly sat in that Stamford office and signed this policy amendment. Which means whoever forged your signature either didn't know you were out of the country or didn't think anyone would check. They had tried to erase their tracks so thoroughly that the erasure itself became the evidence. The notary disappearing was supposed to close the loop," I said, slowly understanding now. "No one to question about whether I was actually there. No one to testify about what really happened." "Exactly," Vernon said. "But they didn't understand how state archives work. They thought retirement meant destruction. Actually, that was their biggest mistake." He closed the laptop with quiet finality. "This document is admissible proof of fraud," he said. "Identity theft, forgery, insurance fraud. Combined with the recording your housekeeper's son made, we have the foundation for criminal charges." I should have felt relief. We had evidence. We had proof. We had the beginning of a case that could stand up in court. But all I felt was cold certainty that we'd only scratched the surface. "I need to know who this man really is," I said. "Julian, the man planning this with Lorraine. I need his real name, his past, the people before me." Vernon pulled out his phone, dialed a number from memory, put the call on speaker. It rang twice before a man answered. "Vernon." The voice was calm, measured, professional. "It's been a while." Wade, Vernon said. I need your help. Identity investigation. Full background. Someone who's done this before. Wade Harrington's voice on the speaker was calm and measured the voice of someone who had spent 15 years investigating people who changed their names and knew exactly how to find what they'd buried. I'm listening, Wade said. Vernon glanced at me. I nodded. Client's wife is planning his murder with a man she's been seeing. Vernon said, each word delivered with clinical precision. We have audio recording. We have forged documents. We need to know who this man really is. Everything about him. Every identity he's used. Every victim before this one. Silence on the other end. Not hesitation. Calculation. This is the Phoenix pattern, Wade said finally. Not a question. We think so, Vernon replied. Client heard them reference previous work. Montana, Phoenix. Both made to look accidental. How bad do you want to know? Wade asked. The question wasn't casual. It carried weight, the kind of weight that meant the answer would change things. That whatever Wade found would be worse than I was imagining. I leaned forward toward the phone. I want the truth, I said, no matter how bad. 3 seconds of silence. I could hear Wade breathing on the other end. Considering. Measuring whether I understood what I was asking for. When someone has decided they want to know the truth, Wade said finally, there's nothing more to say. I'll start now. 48 hours for preliminary. Vernon has my rates. The line went dead. Vernon pocketed his phone and looked at me across 2 cups of coffee that had gone cold while we'd been dismantling my wife's conspiracy. There's someone else we need to talk about, he said quietly. Your executive assistant called me this morning, before anyone knew what she'd done. Vernon called me at the hotel at 2:30 to tell me about 2 things that had happened while I was running my executive assistant's 47-minute confession, and a man arrested at Candlewood Lake who'd been waiting for me since 8:30 that morning. I'd checked into the Stamford Marriott, under a name that wasn't mine, paid cash for 3 nights, and spent the last hour staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had unraveled since dawn. The call from Vernon pulled me back to immediate reality. Briar Sinclair called me at 5:45 this morning, Vernon said without preamble. Before anyone knew what she'd done. Before she discovered you hadn't shown up at the lake. She said she'd been unable to sleep for 6 nights. Briar Sinclair, 35, had worked as my executive assistant for 3 years and sat across from Vernon, with hands that wouldn't stop moving, confessing before anyone could catch her. What did she confess to? I asked, though part of me already knew. The forged signature required more than just skill. It required access. Last Wednesday, Lorraine came to your corporate office, Vernon said. Brought a cash envelope, $5,000 in $100 bills. Told Briar she was helping you prepare a surprise gift and needed to temporarily copy your access credentials, passwords, security tokens, the biometric backup for your executive suite. I closed my eyes. Wednesday. I'd been at a supplier meeting in Boston. Lorraine knew my schedule better than I did. Briar believed her initially, Vernon continued. Your wife can be very convincing when she wants something. But that night, Briar started thinking about why you'd need your own credentials copied. Why you wouldn't just do it yourself. Why Lorraine would pay $5,000 in cash for something that should have been simple. She couldn't sleep, I said. 6 nights, Vernon confirmed. She told me she kept checking the news waiting to see your name. Kept expecting something terrible. This morning at 5:45 she called. Said she needed to tell someone before it was too late. She had called before being caught. That single-choice guilt over self-preservation might be the difference between conspiracy and redemption. I met her at your office at 1 o'clock, Vernon said. Small conference room on the 12th floor. She talked for 47 minutes straight without stopping. Every detail. The dates Lorraine visited. The exact amount in the envelope. How she copied the credentials. How she concealed it in the audit logs. Lorraine mentioned a bigger plan but didn't specify what. Did Briar know about the murder plot? I asked. No, Vernon said with certainty. She thought it was financial. Corporate espionage, maybe. Access to proprietary systems. She had no idea Lorraine was planning to kill you. I absorbed this slowly. The network was larger than I'd thought, but fractured. Not everyone who'd helped had known what they were helping with. She called before being caught, Vernon repeated. That matters, legally and morally. She chose to confess. What else? I asked, because I could hear in Vernon's voice that there was more. At 8:30 this morning, Vernon said, his tone shifting. The same time you were supposed to be getting into that car, a man named Tate Whitfield was waiting on a yacht at Candlewood Lake dock, waiting for you. Tate Whitfield, 35, specialized in making accidents look real and had been hired through an intermediary to handle what he'd been told was a routine contract. The plan was specific, Vernon continued. You'd arrive at the lake for a fishing trip. Tate would be waiting. Something would happen on the water, mechanical failure maybe, or an accident with the boat, and you'd drown. Quick, clean, accidental. I imagined it. The reservoir. Deep water. A 71-year-old man who'd gone fishing and never came back. The kind of tragedy that happened often enough that no one would question it too deeply. 8:30 came, Vernon said. 8:35. 8:40. No target. Tate called his contact to report the delay. No one answered, because the conspiracy was already collapsing and he didn't know it yet. I sat forward on the hotel bed, phone pressed to my ear. His orders were clear, Vernon continued. If the target doesn't arrive within 30 minutes, create a false accident scene anyway. Stage it to look like a fishing trip happened. Leave evidence. Create the appearance of proof. So he began setting it up, I said. He began, Vernon confirmed. And that's when Water Patrol closed in from two sides. They'd been watching since his boat docked at 8:15. Coordinated by Detective Sandoval, who I called at 7 this morning after you told me everything. 2 men on 2 docks. One waiting to kill, one waiting to live. Both discovering that morning that waiting changes nothing. They arrested Tate Whitfield at 9:12 a.m., Vernon said quietly. The exact moment you were sitting at Greenwich Harbor with your hands shaking for the first time in 40 years. 2 docks, 2 men. Same trembling. The symmetry was devastating. While I'd been processing my escape, another man had been processing his capture. While I'd been letting myself break down in private, he'd been putting his hands behind his back for handcuffs. He's talking, Vernon added. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. He gave up the intermediary who hired him. The intermediary is already giving up the next connection. The chain is unraveling. I sat in the hotel room absorbing it all. The conspiracy had tentacles in my office, on the water, in forged documents across state lines. Every revelation showed me how vast this was. Breyer's guilt, Tate's arrest, the notary who'd disappeared, the driver who'd waited at my gate. But I still didn't know the most important thing, who Julian Ashford really was. Wade's call came 90 minutes later. Wade called at 3:30 and needed exactly 8 minutes to tell me that the man I'd seen through the jasmine bushes had killed at least 2 women before deciding to kill me. Vernon was still in the hotel room when the call came. We both listened on speaker. Wade's voice methodical and unhurried, delivering horror with the same clinical precision he'd use for a quarterly report. Julian Ashford legally changed his name 11 years ago, Wade began. Property dispute with his first wife's family after she died. They contested the life insurance payout. He won, changed his name, moved east. How did she die? I asked. Mountain climbing accident. Northern Michigan. She fell from a ridge during what was supposed to be an easy trail. $3.5 million policy. Investigation ruled it accidental. No evidence of foul play. I felt something cold settle deeper into my chest. Second engagement. Wade continued without pause. Seattle 4 years later. Wealthy software consultant. She called off the wedding 6 months before it was scheduled. filed for a restraining order 3 weeks after that. No details in the public record, but Julian left the state within a month. She survived, Vernon said quietly. She survived, Wade confirmed. Third marriage, Phoenix, wealthy widow real estate portfolio. They were married 2 years. She died in a house fire in 2022. 5.2 million insurance payout. Fire investigation ruled it accidental faulty wiring in the kitchen. Julian wasn't home at the time. Fourth. I was the fourth target. 2 dead. 1 escaped. 1 sitting in a hotel room learning the pattern. This isn't a man who loves your wife, Wade said, and there was something almost gentle in how he delivered it. This is what he does. You're his 4th target that we can document. There may be others we haven't found yet. 8.7 million EO, I said, doing the math. From 2 deaths, plus whatever assets he kept from the marriages themselves, Wade added. Property investments, joint accounts. The insurance is just the visible part. He's escaped legal consequences twice, I said. The pattern says he'll try a 3rd time. Yes, Wade said simply. He will. The line went dead. Vernon and I sat in the hotel room, silence, facing the hardest question. The air conditioning hummed. Traffic noise filtered through double-pane windows. The world continued its ordinary progression while we calculated how to stop a man who'd perfected the art of profitable murder. 2 options, Vernon said finally. We report everything now. The recording, the insurance fraud, Wade's findings about Julian's history. Investigation opens immediately. Arrests likely within 24 hours. But he slipped through twice before, I said. Exactly, Vernon confirmed. Good lawyers, accidental rulings, reasonable doubt. The first wife's death was 11 years ago. Evidence is cold. The Phoenix fire was ruled accidental by professional investigators. We have strong circumstantial evidence, but Julian knows how to create reasonable doubt. I looked at the cheap sailboat painting on the hotel wall. Mass-produced art, designed to make temporary spaces feel less temporary. Second option, Vernon continued. We set a trap. Give them another chance to reveal themselves. Catch them in the act. No legal loopholes, no reasonable doubt, but it's dangerous. It requires you as bait. I thought about the first wife who'd climbed a mountain in Michigan. The Phoenix widow who'd lit a fire in her kitchen not knowing. The Seattle woman who'd seen something, some detail, some wrong word, and canceled the wedding in time. He's escaped twice, I said. There won't be a 3rd time. We set the trap. Vernon nodded once, pulled out his phone, made a call. Detective Denise Sandoval arrived at 5:30. 55 years old, with the patient, watchful face of someone who had seen the worst of people and chosen not to be surprised anymore. She sat in the desk chair while Vernon and I took the beds, and she listened without interrupting as Vernon walked her through everything. He played Silas's recording all 11 minutes, showed her the insurance policy with my forged signature and the state archives proving I was in Singapore, shared the transcript of Breyer's 47-minute confession, explained Wade's findings about Julian's pattern across 3 states and 11 years. Sandoval took no notes, just absorbed everything with the focused attention of someone who knew that the first telling was the most accurate. When Vernon finished, she was quiet for 30 seconds. Enough to open an investigation, she said finally. Probably enough to arrest, but not enough to guarantee conviction without catching them in another attempt. What do you want to do next? I want to give them another chance to reveal themselves, I said. Catch them in the act. No doubt. No loopholes. Sandoval looked at me for 3 full seconds, measuring something I couldn't identify. Okay, she said. But my way. If we're setting a trap, we do it by the book with proper coordination, backup at every point, evidence chain documented at every step, or we don't do it at all. Agreed, I said. She pulled out a notebook. Vernon moved to the desk with his laptop. I stayed on the bed with a legal pad someone had left in the nightstand drawer. The blank paper filled slowly over 4 hours. Every detail, every contingency, every person who needed to be where when it happened. At 9 o'clock, Sandoval closed her notebook and stood. Vernon coordinates legal elements, she said. I coordinate law enforcement. And you go home and sit across the dinner table from a woman who spent the day wondering why you're still alive. She left without another word. I had to go home now. Had to walk back into that house and perform the most dangerous role of my life. I stood outside my own front gate for 30 seconds before letting myself enter, mentally rehearsing the role I had to play, ordinary husband, who'd had a strange day with a driver mix-up, nothing more. The house glowed warm against the night. Lights on in the front hall, the kitchen upstairs, in what I still thought of as our bedroom, despite sleeping in the guest room for months. She was home, waiting. Either she thought I was dead and was about to discover otherwise, or she knew the plan had failed and was preparing her own performance. I opened the gate. The hinges made their familiar squeak, the same sound from this morning when I'd walked through them to escape. A lifetime ago. I started up the walkway. The front door opened before I could reach it. Lorraine stood in this doorway, backlit by the hall chandelier, and for a split second I saw her exactly as she'd looked 26 years ago in that small Virginia chapel, beautiful in a simple way, smiling, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "Honey," her voice carried perfect relief, perfect concern. "I was so worried. Where have you been?" She came down the steps, arms reaching for me. I let her embrace me, felt her hands on my back, her face against my shoulder. The same embrace I'd known for 26 years. The same perfume, Chanel No. 5, the one she'd worn since we met. But beneath the familiar warmth, I saw something else now. The way her eyes studied my face when she pulled back. The way her hands lingered on my arms, as if confirming I was solid. Real, alive. Cold calculation, measuring whether a problem had been solved or whether it remained unsolved. I'd spent 40 years reading faces across boardroom tables, knowing when someone was bluffing, when they were afraid, when they were lying about quarterly projections or hiding catastrophic losses. How many boardroom negotiations had I read perfectly, while missing the one face that mattered most? Strange situation with the driver, I said, keeping my voice calm. Tired, but not shaken. Vernon's been coordinating with the company all day. I'll tell you over dinner if you haven't eaten. I waited, she said, still holding my arms. I couldn't eat, not knowing where you were. When the driver said you never came out, I thought... She stopped. Let the sentence hang with implication. What had she thought? That the plan had worked, that I was already at the bottom of Candlewood Lake. I'm fine, I said. Just a very strange day. She led me inside. The dining room table was set for 2 candles, already lit, wine glasses waiting. And in the center a bottle of Bordeaux I recognized immediately, from Florence. 2 summers ago. The trip where I'd bought her the light blue dress she'd worn this morning while planning my death. I remembered we had this, she said, pouring carefully. Seemed like the right night. You're safe, that's what matters. Safe. The word hung in the air between us with its double meaning. We sat across from each other at the long table. The same table where we'd hosted dinner parties and celebrated anniversaries and discussed vacation plans. She sipped her wine and asked about the driver situation. Her questions were intelligent, specific. What had the company said? Was there police involvement? What was Vernon's recommendation? I performed perfectly. Recounted a fabricated story about a robbery ring targeting wealthy men using fake drivers to study their routines. Enough detail to sound researched. Not enough to reveal I knew the truth. Vernon had coordinated with the company. Police were investigating. Everything was being handled professionally. She listened with the focused attention she brought to everything: board meetings, charity galas, difficult conversations. Nodded at the right moments. Asked follow-up questions that showed she was tracking every detail. Thank God Vernon was there, she said. What would we do without him? Without Vernon, I'd be dead. She didn't know how true her words were. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Let her fingers rest on mine with gentle pressure. The same touch I'd known for 26 years. Comfort. Connection. The physical language of long marriage. I let my hand rest there. Passive allowance rather than active response. She didn't seem to notice the difference. The Bordeaux tasted exactly as it should have. Rich, complex, slightly fruity, with the oak aging we'd discussed with the sommelier in that small Florentine wine shop. The lie tasted like nothing at all. We finished the bottle over an hour. She talked about her day phone calls, errands, the kind of ordinary details that filled ordinary Mondays. I listened and responded, and played my role with the skill of 40 years spent performing competence in rooms where showing weakness meant destruction. Finally, I stood, said I was exhausted. The day had been longer than usual. She stood too, walked me to the hallway that led to the guest wing, stopped at the base of the stairs, where our paths diverged, hers up to the master bedroom, mine down the hall to the room I'd been using for months, claiming insomnia as excuse. She looked at me in the dim light, reached up and touched my face with the tenderness of someone who'd spent decades learning exactly how to touch another person. I love you, she said. 3 words, spoken thousands of times across 26 years, at breakfast tables and airport gates and hospital waiting rooms and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. Words that had meant comfort and partnership and the accumulated weight of shared life. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I tried. Felt the shape of the words forming. But something fundamental had broken. Some capacity for that particular lie had been used up completely in the performance I'd just delivered. Good night, I said instead. I turned and walked into the darkness of the hallway before she could respond. Didn't look back. Heard her footsteps on the stairs behind me ascending to the 2nd floor, where she'd sleep in the bed we'd once shared. The guest room door closed behind me with a soft click. The performance had worked. She believed it or was pretending to, but this was only day 1, and somewhere in the small house behind the garden was a 10-year-old boy who'd saved my life and might still be in danger. At 11 that night, I walked the dark path to the small house behind the garden and knocked softly, knowing I owed Celeste the truth about what her son had done and why he might now be in danger. Celeste Mercer opened the door with the tired, intelligent face of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had known it would come late at night when her son was sleeping. She stepped back without a word, let me in, closed the door behind us. The kitchen was small and tidy. 2 clean cups drying on a towel beside the sink, a single lamp burning in the corner. She gestured to a chair at the small table and sat across from me with her hands folded, waiting. I told her enough. Not everything she didn't need to know about the insurance fraud, or Julian's previous victims, or the full scope of what I'd discovered. But I told her about the plan against my life, about Silas overhearing something he shouldn't have, about him saving me, about why he might be in danger for the next few days. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I knew something was wrong, she said finally. Not this, but something. He's been quiet for a week, drawing the same things over and over. I asked him 3 nights ago what was bothering him. He said nothing. I should have asked harder. He kept it from you to protect you, I said. Not because he didn't trust you. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much of how the world worked and chose to keep working anyway. Come with me, she said. She led me down a narrow hallway to Silas's room. The door was open. He slept on his side, small body curled under a thin blanket, breathing steady and deep. On the nightstand beside his bed lay an open sketchbook. Celeste picked it up carefully, carried it back to the lamplight in the kitchen, opened it to a page near the middle, 2 people at an outdoor table. One figure passing something to the other. The perspective was from behind bushes. You could see the leaves framing the scene. The jasmine bush view, drawn with the careful detail of someone who had studied the moment and needed to remember it exactly. A 10-year-old had seen danger and drawn it because he couldn't say it, and I had walked past those drawings for days without knowing. When did he draw this? I asked. Thursday, Celeste said. Last Thursday. 5 days before. She stopped. 5 days before whatever happened this morning. I looked at the drawing again. The outdoor table. The two figures. The careful detail. He'd been trying to warn me in the only language he had. There are others, Celeste said quietly. She flipped through the pages. More drawings. The same table from different angles. The same two people. A car at a gate. A man standing beside it. This child tried to tell me, I said, and I almost didn't listen. But you did listen, Celeste said. That's what matters. She closed the sketchbook. Set it back on the nightstand beside her sleeping son. What do you need from me? She asked. Keep him close, I said. The next few days, don't let him go anywhere alone. If anything feels wrong, you call Vernon Caldwell immediately. I wrote the number on a piece of paper from my pocket. Day or night. She took the paper, nodded once. I left the small house and walked back through the dark garden to the main residence where my wife slept in our bedroom, and I would sleep in the guest room and the performance would continue. Tuesday through Thursday became a study in sustained duality. Outside, I lived my ordinary life. Morning coffee, office meetings, emails about supply chain logistics and quarterly projections, lunch with colleagues at the usual restaurants, dinners with Lorraine at the long table discussing her day and mine with the practiced ease of long marriage. Inside, I lived a completely different existence. Encrypted calls with Vernon from my car during lunch breaks, coordination updates, legal document preparation, Breyer's formal statement being finalized. Evening calls with Sandoval from the guest room after Lorraine went upstairs, planning refinements, team positioning, backup protocols. Nightly reports from Wade building the dossier on Julian that would be used in prosecution. I maintained perfect normalcy while monitoring my wife's every move, watching for changes in routine, listening for phone calls made from closed rooms, noting when she said she'd be at the spa but came home smelling of coffee instead of eucalyptus. By Wednesday, I realized a profound truth. Lorraine was doing exactly the same thing. She was maintaining the normal wife routine while coordinating with Julian, both of us performing flawlessly, both monitoring each other, both acting on the same stage, neither knowing the other knew. Two actors on the same stage performing different plays, each convinced the other was the only audience. Wednesday dinner, she looked at me across the candlelight with what seemed like genuine concern. Are you okay? She asked. You look tired. Just need a trip to clear my head, I said casually, planting the seed. Get away for a day. Maybe Friday. Where were you thinking? Her voice was light, interested but not pressing. Haven't decided, I said. Maybe the lake. Take the boat out for a few hours. Think through some things. I watched her face. Saw nothing. Perfect control. That sounds nice, she said. You should do that. Thursday afternoon, I sat in my office and reviewed everything with Vernon one final time. The plan was ready. Sandoval's teams were briefed. Wade's dossier was complete. Breyer's statement was signed and notarized. The trap was set. All that remained was the bait. By Thursday afternoon, the plan was ready and the performance had held. Tomorrow, I would tell Lorraine about the Candlewood Lake route, would watch her face for the micro-expression that would confirm everything or destroy my certainty. One sentence, 7 words, and we would know if the trap would close or if I'd misjudged everything. Lorraine's wineglass paused mid-rise for exactly 1.2 seconds, and in that suspended moment, I knew she knew the route, knew the trap, knew I'd be vulnerable at Candlewood Lake Friday. The bait was taken. Now I just had to survive delivering myself to the ambush I'd designed. Thursday dinner. The long table set for 3. Lorraine asking my grandson Oliver, 9 years old, visiting for the week about his drawings. Oliver explaining the perspective in his latest sketch of the garden fountain. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of dinner that happened every Wednesday when Oliver visited. Then I delivered the line Vernon had scripted. Vernon finally scheduled that route survey, I said casually, cutting into the lamb. Candlewood Lake route, Friday morning. Lorraine's wineglass paused mid-rise. 1.2 seconds. Her eyes didn't widen. Her hand didn't tremble. But the pause, that infinitesimal hesitation between hearing the words and responding, told me everything. She didn't ask which part of Candlewood Lake. Didn't ask what time Friday. Didn't ask why Vernon was involved in a routine survey. The questions an innocent spouse would ask. Instead, she raised the glass the rest of the way to her lips, took a small sip, set it down with perfect control. "Be careful," she said. "That route is complicated." Mid-conversation, Oliver dropped his fork. The clatter broke my focus, silver on china, sudden and sharp. When I looked back at Lorraine, her face had reset to perfect neutrality, the micro-expression window closed. "Can I come?" Oliver asked, retrieving his fork. "I've never been to Candlewood Lake." Lorraine's eyes flicked to me, watching, testing. Would I break the route plan by bringing the boy? "Not this time," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Boring logistics work, route measurements. You'd be miserable. Next time," Lorraine said to Oliver, her voice warm with grandmotherly affection. Then to me, "How long will you be gone?" "Most of the day," I said. "Vernon wants comprehensive documentation. I'll probably leave early, be back by dinner." She nodded, reached for the wine bottle, poured herself another glass. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat, but kept my hand steady on my own glass. The roasted rosemary and thyme from the lamb, usually one of my favorite meals, suddenly smelled cloying, overpowering. "That route is complicated," she said again, as if the repetition was casual. But it wasn't. It was confirmation. She knew the isolated access roads, the blind curves, the places where a vehicle could be ambushed and no one would see. She raised her glass slightly. A toast, perhaps, or acknowledgement. I raised mine in return. Crystal touched crystal with a clear, bright note. Oliver looked between us, sensing something in the air he couldn't name. "Are you guys okay?" he asked. "We're fine, sweetheart," Lorraine said, never breaking eye contact with me. "Just tired. It's been a long week." The dinner continued. Dessert, coffee, ordinary conversation about Oliver's school and Lorraine's charity work and my upcoming meetings. Two actors performing for an audience of one oblivious child. When Oliver went upstairs to bed, Lorraine and I stood in the hallway as we had the night before. The same space, the same distance. "Be safe Friday," she said. "Before I tell you what happened in Vernon's office the next morning, I need to know something." Comment. A, if you think Lorraine planned every detail herself, or B, if Julian was the true architect, and tell me why in one sentence. Please note the following includes recreated details for narrative depth, but the pattern is what matters. Thursday morning, Vernon's law office conference room. Vernon called me that Thursday afternoon to describe what had happened in the conference room. His voice was measured, factual, the way he reported everything that mattered. "Any contact from Lorraine, any call that felt wrong, call this number immediately." Breyer had taken it with both hands. Vernon photographed each signed page. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside her the entire time, gone cold, while she signed away her complicity and chose survival. "She called before being caught," Vernon said. "That still matters." Then Sandoval picked up her phone and dialed. I answered on the second ring. "Friday," Sandoval said. "Just one word. We're ready." I closed my eyes. By Thursday afternoon, all the pieces were in place. Breyer's signed statement. Sandoval's tactical team briefed. Vernon's cameras installed along the Candlewood Lake access road. And tomorrow morning I would drive to the most isolated section of that route and wait for my wife to send someone to kill me. The trap was perfect, unless she'd set a better one. I couldn't sleep Thursday night, but it wasn't fear. I'd finished being afraid the moment I understood my wife wanted me dead. I lay in the guest room bed listening to the house settle around me. Down the hall, Lorraine slept in our bedroom. I could picture her there, silver hair spread across the pillow, breathing even, and deep face peaceful in the darkness. The same woman I'd watched sleep for 26 years. But tonight, I kept thinking about the women who'd slept beside Julian before. The first wife who'd gone mountain climbing in Michigan and never returned. Had someone lain beside her that last night? Had she kissed a man goodnight, not knowing it was the last time? Or had she gone alone thinking the trip was her own idea, not understanding she'd been guided toward that ridge? The Phoenix widow who'd died in a house fire while Julian was conveniently away. Had she eaten dinner with him that final evening? Laughed at something he said. Made plans for the weekend that would never come. Julian's previous victims likely spent their last nights beside people who loved them or thought they did. Just as I was lying here now, alone in a guest room, while my wife of 26 years slept down the hall, dreaming of my death. The mirror image of trust and betrayal. Lorraine turned in her sleep. I heard the sound through the wall sheets, rustling, her weight shifting. Her hand probably reaching toward the other side of the bed, where I used to sleep before claiming insomnia months ago. I didn't move. At 3 in the morning, I got up, dressed quietly in the dark, left through the side entrance where my car was already positioned, drove to the Stamford Marriott, where I'd kept a room under another name since Monday. Tomorrow it would end. Tomorrow Lorraine would learn I knew, and one of us wouldn't walk away from what came next. 6 o'clock Friday morning. Phone screen glow in the dark hotel room. Time to stop thinking about the dead and focus on staying alive. I called Sandoval first. She answered on the first ring, voice calm and professional despite the early hour. Team 1 Lakeside position 700 hours, she said without preamble. Team 2 corporate office 7:30, we're ready. Communications, encrypted channel. You'll have an earpiece. Vernon and I will hear everything. Backup is 2 minutes out at any point along the route. And if something goes wrong, then we abort and arrest based on what we have. But nothing will go wrong. We've run this scenario 4 times. Every contingency is covered. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to trust that 40 years of boardroom strategy and Vernon's legal precision and Sandoval's tactical planning would be enough against a man who'd successfully killed twice before. 7:15 departure, I confirmed. We'll be watching, Sandoval said. The line went dead. Vernon called at 6:30. Board has been notified under attorney-client privilege, he said. All credential access is being monitored. If Lorraine attempts any transfers or document access this morning, we'll know immediately. She won't, I said. She thinks I'm already dead or about to be. She'll wait. Probably, Vernon agreed. But we're watching anyway. He paused. I heard him breathing on the other end. 19 years of working together meant I knew what that pause meant. This is the right move, he said finally. Catching them in the act. No loopholes, no reasonable doubt. You're doing this correctly. Or I'm about to get killed on a lake road, I said. That won't happen, Vernon said with certainty I didn't quite feel. Sandoval's team is the best. I'll see you tonight. At 7 o'clock, Glenn Wolfe walked into the hotel lobby. I'd known Glenn for 8 years. He'd driven me to 1,000 meetings, waded through 1,000 boardroom negotiations, maintained professional silence through phone calls and strategy sessions that should have been private, but became shared simply through proximity. Quiet presence, watchful eyes, and on his left thumb the silver ring his father had given him the week before he died. The ring caught the lobby light as he approached. The same ring I'd looked for Monday morning when the fake driver had stood at our gate. The detail that had confirmed everything. Glenn extended his hand. I shook it. I'll always be there, sir, he said. The same thing he'd said 8 years ago when I'd hired him. Not a promise about driving. A promise about loyalty. I know, I said. We walked to the car in silence. The sky was clear. Early morning light turning everything sharp and defined. The parking lot nearly empty. Friday morning in Stamford before the business world woke up. Glenn opened the passenger door. I slid in. He closed it with the same careful attention he brought to everything. Not too hard, not too soft, exactly right. He got in the driver's side, started the engine, looked at me in the rearview mirror. Route 37 to Candlewood Lake Access Road, I said. He nodded once. Put the car in drive. We pulled out of the parking lot at 7:15 exactly. Traffic was light. The road opened up before us, familiar Connecticut landscape, trees and hills, and the ordinary geography of a life I'd lived for 71 years. Glenn drove with the same steady competence he'd shown for 8 years. No anxiety, no questions. Just the job done correctly because that was how he did everything. We pulled onto Route 37 heading north toward Candlewood Lake. Glenn drove. I sat passenger side watching the tree line blur past. Somewhere ahead on that isolated service road, someone was waiting with instructions from my wife. The trap was armed. Now we'd see whose trap it was. The gray car appeared in the rearview mirror. 8.2 miles past the highway exit. 2 people inside, 4 cars back following at exactly our speed. Glenn noticed it first. His eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to the road, then to the mirror again, with the attention of someone who'd spent 8 years watching for patterns that didn't belong. Gray sedan, he said quietly. 2 people. 4 cars back. Started following 3 miles after the exit. I didn't turn around. Just watched in the side mirror as the gray car maintained its distance with mechanical precision. Not closing. Not falling back. Just there. Constant. Sandoval, I asked. Glenn touched his ear where the tiny earpiece sat invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Listened. Nodded once. Sandoval confirms Team 1 in position 0745, he said. We continue normally. Normally. As if driving toward your own planned murder was something you could do normally. The road curved along the lake. Through the trees I could see water Candlewood Lake spreading dark and deep between steep, rocky shores. I'd fished here a few times over the years, knew the depth, knew how the bottom dropped away fast just 20 feet from shore, knew that if something went into that water, recovery could take days. Deep water, steep shore, no witnesses, a 71-year-old man who went to survey a route and never came back. Not murder, disappearance. I've fished this lake before, I said, watching the water flash between the trees. Deep water, steep shore. I understand why they picked it. The gray car closed to 3 cars back, then 2. Glenn's hands stayed steady on the wheel. Mine stayed steady on the armrest, where a small button had been installed yesterday, invisible, unless you knew to look for it, wired directly to Sandoval's command center. We both knew what was coming. We drove toward it anyway. The road narrowed. Trees pressed closer. Traffic thinned until we were alone except for the gray car that had become our shadow. 8:30, 8:35, 8:40. The curve appeared ahead sharper than the others, blind at the apex. The kind of turn where you couldn't see what waited on the other side until you were already committed. Glenn took it at exactly the speed limit. No hesitation. No signal that he knew anything was different about this particular curve on this particular Friday morning. We came around the blind turn. A car sat stopped in the middle of the road. Black sedan. Hazard lights blinking. Positioned perfectly to block both lanes with just enough room that you'd have to slow down, stop, make a decision about whether to wait or try to squeeze past. Stopped vehicle, Glenn said, voice calm, blocking the road. He braked smoothly. Brought us to a stop 30 feet back. Put the car in park. Hands still on the wheel. The driver's door of the black sedan opened. A man got out. Tall. Neat dark hair going silver at the temples. Gray coat despite the June warmth. Early 40s. Handsome in the way that people trust without thinking about why. Professional calm in every movement. Julian Ashford. I'd seen him twice before voice on a recording figure through jasmine bushes. but this was the first time we occupied the same physical space. The first time I could see his face clearly. The first time the man who'd killed 2 women and planned to kill me became real instead of abstract. He walked toward our car with his hands visible, gesturing in the universal language of roadside trouble, mouthing words through the windshield that I could read even without hearing roadside incident. Need some help here, car trouble. Just take a minute. The performance of the stranded motorist who needed assistance. His right hand moved slightly toward the inside of his gray coat. Not yet. Just positioning. Getting ready. Behind us, the gray car had stopped. 2 occupants watching. Backup. Insurance. The second half of a plan that had worked twice before on women who'd trusted the wrong man. Glenn sat perfectly still, waiting for my signal. Julian came closer. 20 feet. 15. His hand still moving toward that inside pocket with careful casualness. A man reaching for identification, maybe. Or a phone to show you the problem. Or a weapon. 10 feet. I looked at Julian through the windshield. Saw him seeing me, 71-year-old man and passenger seat driver beside him. Exactly what he'd been told to expect. Predictable. Controllable. Already categorized as victim. He didn't know about the recording. Didn't know about the forged insurance policy, or Wade's investigation, or Breyer's signed statement. Didn't know about the tactical teams positioned in the woods since 7:45. Didn't know that the button under my finger connected to all of it. Julian's mouth moved again. Words I couldn't hear but could guess, so sorry to bother you. Car just died, phone's not working. Could you possibly? His hand slipped inside his coat. I pressed the button. Silent. Simple. Just a small click under my finger that Julian couldn't hear and wouldn't have understood if he had. The button wasn't a panic alarm. It was a signal. The single point of coordination that activated Sandoval's tactical teams hidden in the woods, Vernon's legal lockdown freezing every account Lorraine could access, and the simultaneous raid on the corporate office where Team 2 was moving on Lorraine at this exact moment. 30 seconds to turn an ambush site into an arrest scene. Julian took another step toward the car. His hand emerged from inside his coat. The button clicked under my finger. Silent. Simple. And in that half-second before everything erupted, before the tactical vans, the sirens, the commands to freeze, Julian was still walking toward our car, hand reaching inside his gray coat. He thought he was the hunter. He didn't know the trap had already closed. 3 unmarked cars materialized simultaneously, one from each end of the curve, one from the hidden access road, and in 4 seconds flat, the lakeside ambush site became an arrest perimeter. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the sound of car doors opening with professional synchronization, and 6 tactical officers in civilian clothes stepping out into the morning air. Julian stopped mid-step. His hand froze halfway inside his gray coat. His head turned left, then right, cataloging the vehicles, the officers, the geometry of the trap that had just materialized around him. No escape route existed that he could reach before someone could reach him. I watched his face through the windshield. Expected panic. Expected rage or fear, or the wild calculation of someone looking for a way out. Instead, I saw cold assessment followed by acceptance. The face of someone who had always known this was a possibility and had already planned what to do when it happened. Minimize charges. Cooperate enough to reduce sentencing. Play the long game. He'd done this before. Not the arrest, but the mental preparation for it. The same way he'd prepared for mountain climbing accidents and house fires and staged drownings. Slowly, deliberately, Julian withdrew his hand from inside his coat. Empty. Raised both hands to shoulder height. Said nothing. Hands visible, one of the officers said, voice calm and professional. Not shouting. Just clear direction delivered with absolute authority. Do not reach. Do not move. Julian didn't move. Behind us I heard more car doors. The gray sedan that had followed us. The accomplice, younger man in a dark jacket, stepped out with his hands already raised. No resistance. No surprise. Just professional criminals encountering professional law enforcement and making the calculation that compliance cost less than resistance. No sirens, no shouting, just car doors opening and professional silence. Two officers approached Julian from different angles. One spoke into a radio. Another moved toward the gray car. Everything choreographed. Everyone knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. Glenn sat perfectly still beside me, hands on the wheel, watching in the side mirror. His breathing was steady, his expression unchanged. This was the moment we'd been driving toward since 7:15, but you wouldn't know it from looking at him. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The officers reached Julian. One spoke to him words I couldn't hear through the windshield. Julian nodded once, turned around slowly, put his hands behind his back, handcuffs. Professional, efficient, no struggle. I'd imagined this moment 100 times since Monday morning, when Silas had pulled me behind the rose bushes. Imagined it violent. Imagined Julian resisting. Imagined chaos and shouting, and the possibility that something could still go wrong. None of those versions were this quiet. This was just law enforcement doing what they'd trained to do, executed with precision that made it look routine. A man being arrested on a lakeside road on a Friday morning in June. Ordinary in its professionalism, but it wasn't ordinary. It was the culmination of 5 days of investigation, planning, coordination, and risk. It was Julian Ashford who'd killed 2 women and planned to kill me, being removed from the world where he could hurt anyone else. One of the officers walked to Julian's abandoned car, looked inside, called something to his partner. The partner photographed the interior through the window before anyone touched anything. Evidence preservation. Every step documented. The driver's door of the lead unmarked car opened. Detective Denise Sandoval stepped out. Same patient, watchful face I'd seen in the hotel room Monday night. She walked toward our car with steady purpose, no hurry, no drama. She knocked on my window. I rolled it down. "Clean," she said. Just that one word first. Then no resistance, no weapons discharged, no injuries, everyone in custody. I nodded. Couldn't quite find words yet. "You did well," Sandoval said. Not praise exactly, just acknowledgement of fact. Stayed calm, followed the protocol, made it easy for my team. "Glenn did most of it," I said. Sandoval glanced at Glenn, nodded once. Professional respect between people who'd just executed something difficult correctly. She pulled out her phone, checked the time, looked at me through the window. "Team 2, she said. "Now." 2 words that meant somewhere else in Connecticut, another team was moving on Lorraine. The second half of the operation activating at the exact moment the first half closed. "Where?" I asked. "Corporate office," Sandoval said. "She went in at 8 this morning, acting normal, attending meetings, waiting for confirmation you were dead. She doesn't know yet." "When will she know?" "When my officers walk into her office in approximately 90 seconds. Sandoval straightened, looked back at where Julian stood between 2 officers, hands cuffed, being read his rights in that same calm, professional voice. "We'll need your statement," she said. "Official testimony about the recording, the insurance fraud, everything. But not now. You've done enough for one morning." She tapped the roof of the car twice. A signal. Glenn started the engine. "Vernon will meet you at the hotel," Sandoval said. "He's coordinating the legal elements. Go, we'll handle the rest here." She walked back toward her vehicle, already pulling out her radio. I heard her voice through the open window. "Team 2 status." A crackling response I couldn't make out. Glenn put the car in reverse, backed up carefully, turned around in a driveway 20 feet back where someone had left their trash bins out for collection. The ordinary details of an ordinary Friday morning. We drove back past the scene. Julian in handcuffs, the accomplice being walked to a different vehicle, officers photographing everything. Julian's black sedan still blocking the road, now surrounded by evidence markers. As we passed, Julian looked up. Our eyes met for maybe half a second. He'd thought he was hunting a 71-year-old man on a lake road. Thought he understood the geometry of predator and prey. He'd been wrong. Sandoval walked back to her vehicle, already on radio coordinating Team 2. Somewhere 3 miles away, the corporate office where Lorraine sat in a meeting, my wife was about to learn her carefully planned murder had become her arrest warrant. And unlike Julian, she wouldn't see it coming. The underground lighting cast everything in sodium vapor yellow, turning the concrete pillars into prison bars. Somewhere above us, Lorraine sat in her corner office, completely unaware that Julian Ashford was already in custody at Candlewood Lake. Detective Sandoval emerged first, flanked by 2 plainclothes officers. They moved with the same professional economy I'd witnessed at the lake, no urgency, no theatrics, just methodical inevitability. Behind them came a woman in a tailored pantsuit carrying a leather portfolio. Federal prosecutor. This wasn't just an arrest. This was a performance designed to strip away every layer of my wife's carefully constructed dignity. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number, subject unaware. Proceeding as planned. I'd spent 4 months orchestrating this moment, ensuring Lorraine would be at the office, ensuring her assistant would be at lunch, ensuring the security footage would capture everything. The same meticulous attention to detail she'd applied to planning my murder. "You don't have to watch this," Glenn said, though we both knew I did. Through the glass doors, I could see them entering the main lobby. Building security didn't even glance up. Sandoval had coordinated with them an hour ago. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime. Floor 47. Lorraine's domain, where she'd built her reputation as the ruthless architect of hostile takeovers. Where she'd probably plotted my death, between conference calls treating my murder like just another line item on her agenda. She had no idea I'd been quietly consolidating ownership stakes across 12 East Coast logistics carriers since 2018, shell entities holding companies, layered structures that would take a forensic accountant months to trace. What appeared to be a $40 million estate was the visible surface of something 9 times larger. She'd based her entire plan on that number: the life insurance, the property liquidation, the timeline of her financial freedom. She had no idea I'd been quietly building a fortune through cryptocurrency investments and private equity deals since 2019, keeping it completely separate from our marital assets. The stupidity of it staggered me. She'd planned to murder her husband for $40 million, when patience alone would have eventually given her access to 10 times that amount. Greed and impatience, the combination that had destroyed smarter people than Lorraine. "Movement," Glenn said. I looked up at the building's facade, counting floors. 47. Behind those tinted windows, my wife's carefully ordered world was collapsing. My phone rang. Sandoval's number. "It's done," he said simply. She actually laughed when we told her the charges. Thought it was some kind of corporate prank. Then we played her the recordings. I closed my eyes, remembering those conversations I'd captured Lorraine discussing payment schedules and timelines with the same clinical detachment she used for quarterly earnings reports. How did she react? Went completely silent, then asked for her lawyer. Sandoval paused. "She asked about you. Wanted to know if you were aware of the arrest." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing, but she knows." The elevator doors in the garage opened. 2 officers emerged first, clearing the path. Then Lorraine, hands cuffed behind her back, walking between Sandoval and his partner. Even in restraints, she maintained that perfect posture, that glacial composure that had intimidated junior associates and corporate rivals for decades. She looked directly at Marcus's sedan, at me. Our eyes met across 50 feet of concrete and fluorescent lighting. Her expression didn't change. No shock, no anger, no fear. Just cold calculation, probably already gaming out her legal options. But then something shifted in her face. A tiny crack in that flawless mask. Recognition. Understanding. The knowledge that I hadn't just survived her plot, I'd anticipated it, documented it, and orchestrated her complete destruction with the same ruthless efficiency she'd admired in herself. "She knows you won," Marcus said softly. They loaded her into an unmarked sedan. No media, no spectators, no public humiliation. That would come later during the trial. For now, just a quiet arrest in an underground garage witnessed by security cameras and one 71-year-old man who'd refused to die on schedule. My phone buzzed. Text from my attorney, estate paperwork finalized. All assets protected under revised trust. She can't touch anything. 26 years of marriage ending in a parking garage with the smell of exhaust and concrete. I should have felt something: triumph, vindication, even sorrow. But sitting there watching the sedan carrying my wife disappear up the exit ramp, all I felt was tired. Tired and free. "Sir." Glenn's voice pulled me back. "Detective Sandoval wants to know if you'll come down to the station. They need a formal statement." I nodded, but my attention had already shifted to the larger question. What came after revenge? I'd spent so long planning Lorraine's downfall that I hadn't considered what my life would look like once she was actually gone. Glenn started the engine. As we pulled out of the garage into afternoon sunlight, my phone rang one final time. Unknown number blocked caller ID. "Mr. Garrison," a woman's voice said. "This is Margaret Holloway with the Federal Prosecutor's Office. We need to discuss your wife's co-conspirators. There are others involved that we believe you're not aware of." I gripped the phone tighter. "Others. Multiple others. Your wife didn't plan this alone. We need to talk. Immediately." The call from Margaret Holloway came Thursday evening, but by 10 o'clock Friday morning, the mystery resolved itself when Tate Whitfield confessed at the Candlewood Lake dock. I realized then that Lorraine's plan had backup layers I'd never anticipated. I stood 20 feet back while Detective Sandoval and Wade Harrington questioned him. Tate was mid-30s construction worker, build hands that wouldn't stop moving. Nervous energy radiating off him like heat from pavement. "Walk me through Monday," Sandoval said, voice neutral as lake water. Tate's fingers drummed against his thigh. "Intermediary said there'd be a man on a boat Monday morning. Specific dock, specific time. Said to make it look accidental. And," Wade leaned forward slightly, "target never showed." Tate looked at the dock like it had personally betrayed him. "I waited 3 hours. Nothing. Called the intermediary, said the job was dead. He said stage it anyway. Proof of commitment, he called it. So I created the scene: overturned tackle, broken railing, blood in the water. Made it look like someone went over." Sandoval's expression didn't change. "Who paid you?" "Never met the actual hirer, only worked through the intermediary." Tate swallowed hard. "Name's Marcus Vega." Wade was already pulling out his phone, fingers moving across the screen. Tracing connections I knew, following the money backward from Vega to Julian to Lorraine. But I'd stopped listening. Monday. She'd tried Monday first. I'd survived without even knowing I was supposed to be dead. That Monday, I'd canceled my usual morning on the boat because of a dentist appointment. Routine schedule change. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Just life's ordinary chaos saving me from a murder I hadn't known was coming. The realization tasted like copper. Lorraine had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Multiple contingencies, backup plans, layers within layers. When Monday failed, she'd pivoted immediately to Friday's lakeside approach. "Mr. Garrison," Sandoval's voice pulled me back. "You recognize the name Marcus Vega?" I shook my head. Another stranger in my wife's secret architecture. How many people had she recruited? How many knew about her plan to kill me while I'd gone about my ordinary life completely oblivious? "He'll lead us back," Wade said quietly, still focused on his phone. "Vega's got a record. Conspiracy fraud, served 18 months in 2019. He's a professional middleman. Professional." The word lodged in my chest. My wife had hired professionals. Plural. This wasn't passion or impulse, this was procurement with the same care she'd use selecting a contractor for kitchen renovations. Tate was still talking, providing details about payment schedules and communication protocols. I heard maybe half of it. The rest got lost in the mental image of myself on Monday morning sitting in a dentist's chair, getting my teeth cleaned, while a hired killer waited at the dock, wondering where his target had gone. By noon, Sandoval had what he needed. Tate was formally arrested, read his rights, led to a waiting cruiser. Wade stayed behind, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with federal prosecutors about Vega's location. I drove to the judicial building alone. Vernon had texted earlier, initial paperwork, procedural formalities, my presence not required, but welcome if I wanted closure. I wasn't sure what closure looked like anymore, but I went anyway. The hallway outside the processing rooms smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that persistent institutional drone that makes time feel suspended. Vernon was somewhere in a conference room with prosecutors reviewing documents I'd already signed. I waited on a wooden bench, hard and uncomfortable, probably designed that way deliberately. The judicial system didn't believe in comfort. Then she appeared. An officer led Lorraine through the far door heading toward processing. She was still in the clothes from yesterday's arrest, tailored navy suit, pearl earrings, hair perfect, despite everything. She saw me immediately. Her steps faltered. Half a step, maybe less. The officer didn't pause, kept his professional pace, but Lorraine's eyes locked on mine across 30 feet of empty hallway. 26 years collapsed into one half-step hesitation in a courthouse hallway. I saw her exactly as she'd been on our wedding day. Small church in Hartford, holding white roses, looking toward me with an expression I'd interpreted as nervous joy. That same slight widening of her eyes, that same subtle parting of her lips. I'd thought it was love. The officer touched her elbow gently, redirecting her forward. She moved with him, never breaking eye contact with me until the doorway forced her to turn. I sat motionless. The hallway was silent again, except for the fluorescent hum and the distant murmur of voices from behind closed doors. My hands rested on my knees, completely still, but something inside me had fractured. I couldn't tell if what I'd seen in her face was genuine grief at being caught or performance. Worse, I couldn't tell if my own pain was for her or for the marriage that had never actually existed. 26 years of shared meals and conversations and bed, and I had no idea which parts had been real. Maybe none of it. Maybe all of it. Maybe she'd loved me once and the feeling had curdled into something murderous. Maybe she'd been calculating from day one, seeing dollar signs where I'd seen partnership. I would never know. That was the thing I couldn't reconcile, not the betrayal itself, but the permanent uncertainty, the unanswerable question that would follow me the rest of my life. Footsteps approached. Vernon emerged from the conference room, documents in hand, but he wasn't looking at the paperwork. He was looking at my face. "You saw her," he said. Not a question. I nodded. He waited, giving me space to speak if I needed it. Finally, I said the only true thing I knew. "I have no idea who she was." Vernon understood I didn't mean just now. I meant ever. He sat down beside me, setting the documents on the bench between us. Neither of us looked at them. Outside, through the narrow window at the hall's end, afternoon sun slanted across the parking lot. Friday traffic building. People heading into their weekends, their normal lives, completely unaware that 2 floors above them, a 71-year-old man was sitting on an uncomfortable bench, trying to figure out if any moment of his marriage had been genuine. "The prosecutors want to talk about next steps," Vernon said eventually. "Protection for your grandson, asset distribution, testimony timelines." I heard the words, processed them somewhere distant, but my mind was still in that half-second when Lorraine's eyes had met mine, and I'd seen something I couldn't name looking back. 3 weeks after the arrests, Vernon laid out the final charging documents across his conference table, and I understood for the first time that surviving isn't the same as winning, It's just being the one left standing when the accounting is done. Detective Sandoval sat across from me, reading glasses perched on her nose, pen tapping a steady rhythm against her notepad. Vernon had his sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The overhead fan turned slowly, moving warm air around the room without cooling anything. Julian Ashford faces conspiracy to commit murder fraud, identity fraud, Vernon said, sliding the first document toward me. Additionally, 2 cold cases have been reopened. Phoenix widow in 2009, Montana rancher in 2012. Pattern matches, evidence connects. He won't see daylight. I stared at the dates. 15 years. Julian had been doing this for at least 15 years, probably longer, which meant Lorraine would have known his history from even basic research. She hadn't stumbled into hiring a killer, she'd deliberately chosen an experienced one, knowing exactly what kind of man he was. The calculation in that choice made my coffee taste like ash. Lorraine took the settlement, Sandoval said quietly. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted fraud, wire fraud. 12 to 18 years depending on cooperation and behavior. 12 to 18 years. Lorraine would be 65 when released. I'd be 83. If either of us lived that long. Tate Whitfield is cooperating, Vernon continued. Reduced to accessory charges in exchange for full testimony, 3 to 5 years, potentially less with good behavior. He's agreeing to testify about Marcus Vega's recruitment methods and payment structures. And Breyer? I asked, remembering the young estate clerk who'd leaked my schedule. Sandoval flipped a page. Breyer Sinclair. Cooperating witness, misdemeanor obstruction, 2 years probation. Lost her position at the estate planning firm. She's working retail now. I nodded. The punishment fit harsh enough to matter, light enough to rebuild from. She'd been young, stupid, seduced by easy money. Not innocent, but not irredeemable. Glenn Wolfe and Otis Ramsey provided crucial testimony, Vernon said, glancing at another document. Glenn's observations of Lorraine's behavior patterns, Otis's records of your actual schedule versus what Lorraine believed. 18 years of assistant work, and Otis kept every calendar, every appointment change, every deviation from routine. I'd never realized how much his careful record-keeping would matter. The dentist appointment that saved my life on Monday had been in his files, time-stamped and documented. The file is complete, Sandoval said, closing her notepad with a definitive snap. Every link accounted for, every connection documented. No loopholes. The case closes clean. Clean. I looked at the stack of documents, hundreds of pages detailing the systematic attempt to murder me for money. Clean felt like the wrong word, but I understood what she meant. Legally airtight. Procedurally sound. Justice served according to the rules. I signed where Vernon indicated, initialing pages I barely read. My signature had never felt heavier, and I'd kept paying property taxes and utilities on an empty house. Vernon had questioned it once, suggested renting it out. I'd said no without explanation, couldn't have explained if I'd tried. But standing in the living room that first afternoon, dust motes floating in sunlight through unchanged curtains, I understood. Some part of me had always known the mansion life was temporary performance. This house was real. The mansion had smelled like money performing wealth. The small house smelled like coffee and morning and truth. I called Glenn the next day. The position is permanent, I told him. Head of security, substantial salary. The amount reflects what you did not, what the job description says. There was silence on the line. Then, sir, that's 3 times the industry standard. Industry standard didn't save my life. You did. He accepted. I hired a new butler the following week. Not through an agency. I'd learned my lesson about polished credentials hiding moral vacancy. Through a friend's recommendation instead. Robert Mitchell, 62, former manager of a Vermont motel for 30 years. He showed up for the interview in khakis and a polo shirt, looking deeply uncomfortable. I ran a motel in Vermont for 30 years, he said, sitting stiffly in my kitchen. Never worked in a mansion. Don't know French cooking or wine pairings, but I know how to make a place honest. Keep it clean, keep it running, treat people decent. You're hired, I said. He blinked. Don't you want references, background check? I'll do the background check. But if you can make coffee and answer the door without pretending to be something you're not, you're already overqualified. He started the following Monday. By Tuesday, the house smelled like coffee every morning. Real coffee brewed in a basic maker, none of the artisanal performance Lorraine's chef had orchestrated with imported beans and precise temperatures. I sat at the kitchen table that first Saturday morning, sunlight warm on my arms, listening to Robert moving around upstairs with a vacuum cleaner. Outside, a neighbor mowed his lawn. Ordinary sounds, honest sounds. Glenn arrived with the mail, mostly junk, one large envelope from the estate attorney, with Tate's custody hearing information, visible through the window. I set it aside and finished my coffee first. For 12 years, I'd lived like every minute was a negotiation. Every conversation, a performance, every moment calculated for maximum social advantage. Now I had time to finish my coffee before opening mail about my grandson's future. That felt like the real victory. September arrived, and I found myself standing in a school reception hall, arranging a scholarship for a boy I'd known for exactly 4 minutes, the 4 minutes that saved my life. The school wasn't the most prestigious in Connecticut. It was the one with the best art program because Silas Mercer drew. I'd seen his sketchbook once left open on the kitchen counter at the mansion, detailed pencilwork perspective that shouldn't be possible for a 9-year-old. Birds in flight, architectural details, human faces with expressions that felt more honest than most photographs. He was the one who'd warned me. Early June morning, before everything unraveled, before I'd even fully understood what I was suspicious of, I'd been walking the mansion grounds thinking through inconsistencies in Lorraine's behavior, and Silas had emerged from behind the rose bushes near the service entrance. "Sir," he'd said, voice barely above a whisper. "I heard people talking yesterday. About Monday morning. About the boat. About making sure you were alone." 4 minutes of halting explanation, a child trying to articulate adult danger he didn't fully understand. But he'd understood enough, and he'd been brave enough to speak. That warning was why I'd canceled Monday's boat trip, why I'd changed my routine, started documenting everything, set the counter-trap in motion. Now I stood across from his mother in the school's administrative office. Celeste Mercer had worked at the mansion as cook and occasional housekeeper, quiet woman, early 40s, who kept to herself and raised her son alone. She'd moved to the small Norwalk house when I did, but we'd barely discussed her continued employment. She just showed up, cooked meals, maintained the household with quiet efficiency. "Mr. Garrison, we can't accept this," she said, clutching the scholarship paperwork like it might burn her. "It's too much. This isn't a gift," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is investment in a person whose value I've seen more clearly than any contract I've ever signed. Your son showed more character in 4 minutes than most of my business partners showed in decades." Her eyes went bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. "He just told you what he heard. Any decent person would have. Any decent person didn't. He did. That distinction matters. 4 minutes. That's how long Silas stood behind those rose bushes telling me what he'd overheard. 4 minutes bought me 50 years. Celeste signed the paperwork with shaking hands. The school's front gate was wrought iron, elegant without being ostentatious. Silas walked toward it carrying a new backpack looking smaller than 10 years old. The art program started today, summer intensive session, before the fall semester. 6 weeks of instruction from working artists, access to studios and materials he'd never touch otherwise. He reached the gate, pulled it open, then stopped, turned back. Our eyes met across the courtyard. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just looked at me with the same observant eyes that had seen danger when adults missed it, that had chosen courage when silence would have been easier. Then he went through the gate and disappeared into the building. Celeste stood beside me, tissues clutched in her fist. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded. Words felt insufficient. 3 weeks later, she knocked on my study door. Evening, late September, leaves beginning to turn outside the window. I'd been reading case files Vernon had sent over final documentation before the trials began. "I'm staying," she said. No preamble, no explanation. I looked up from the papers. "I'm grateful." She nodded, started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "This kitchen is different from the mansion." "Yes, I like it better." She looked around the small room, old appliances, scratched countertops, window that didn't quite close all the way. "It looks like someone lives here." The mansion kitchen had looked like a magazine photo. This kitchen looked like someone made breakfast and forgot to clean up. I'd never felt more at home. "Yes," I said again. "It looks like someone lives here." She understood I wasn't just agreeing. I was confirming something we'd both been thinking, but hadn't voiced. The mansion had been performance space. This was living space. The difference mattered more than square footage or appliance quality. Celeste's decision to stay wasn't about salary or loyalty. The small, honest house felt more like home than the grand mansion ever had. She'd been performing a role in Lorraine's world too, the invisible domestic staff, the backdrop to wealth display. Here she was, just a woman making dinner in a kitchen that smelled like real cooking instead of culinary artistry. She started dinner without asking what I wanted. I sat at the old wooden table doing nothing for the first time in months. Just sitting. Listening to the sounds of someone cooking, the sizzle of oil in a pan, the rhythmic chop of knife on cutting board, the soft hum she made while working. Outside, the maple tree in the backyard rustled in evening breeze. A neighbor's dog barked. Ordinary sounds of ordinary evening in an ordinary neighborhood. I'd spent 12 years surrounded by designer furniture and imported marble and silence that cost extra. Now I sat in a kitchen with a wobbling table leg and linoleum floors and the sound of onions browning in butter. Celeste glanced over her shoulder. "Soup okay, getting cooler?" "Soup's perfect." She went back to chopping vegetables. I watched her work, efficient movements born from decades of practice. She'd cooked in the mansion too, but there she'd been performing for Lorraine's approval, creating dishes for photograph-worthy dinner parties. Here she was just making soup because September evenings were getting chilly, and soup felt right. The stove hummed. Light came through the window at an angle that turned everything golden. Celeste stirred the pot, tasted added salt. I realized this was what Lorraine had been trying to destroy, not my money or my life, but the possibility that I could be happy with less. She'd failed at both, and I was grateful for the failure. Grateful for the small house, the honest kitchen, the woman making soup without pretense. Grateful for the 4 minutes a 9-year-old boy had been braver than he needed to be. 6 months later, on a mild December afternoon, I found Silas sitting on the stone wall behind the house, sketching the dormant rose bushes his mother had planted in September. I settled beside him without speaking. He drew without looking up. That was enough. After a while, he asked without raising his eyes from the page, "Do you ever still feel scared about that morning?" "Sometimes," I said. "Less than before, but yes." He nodded. "Me too. Sometimes I wake up thinking maybe I dreamed it, that I never actually warned you." "You did," I said, "and I'm here because of it." His pencil kept moving, shading a petal, correcting a line, moving to the next. Quiet, focused work. The kind of presence I'd forgotten was possible before that June morning cracked everything open. "Mom says doing the right thing doesn't make life easier," he said. "But it means you can look at yourself in the mirror. Your mother is right." He almost smiled. "She also says you're stubborn. Also right." Celeste's voice came through the kitchen window. "Silas, 10 minutes." He closed the sketchbook, carefully slid off the wall. Paused before running inside. "Thanks for listening," he said. Again. "Thanks for speaking," I said. Again. He grinned one quick flash and was gone. I stayed on the wall while the light faded. The backyard was small and plain. Celeste had planted roses and herbs. Nothing expensive. Nothing performed. I'd spent 26 years in a house where everything cost more than it was worth. I'd nearly died for money I'd hidden, and a marriage I'd misread. I was saved by a boy with a cracked phone and a clear conscience. The arithmetic of that still made me smile. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 26 years in a marriage built on assumptions. I assumed I knew, my wife assumed wealth would protect me, assumed the people closest were the ones I could trust most. Don't make my mistake. The truth isn't always where you expect it, and sometimes the people who save your life are the ones you've barely noticed. What I learned, true value isn't measured in offshore accounts or legal entities. It's measured in the courage of a 9-year-old boy who chose to speak when silence would have been easier. Family stories, revenge are everywhere. Tales of betrayal and greed. But the real stories worth remembering are about unexpected heroes who appear when you need them most. I believe God placed that child behind those rose bushes at exactly the right moment. If you're listening to family stories, revenge, hoping for justice, know this. Sometimes revenge isn't what you do to them, it's simply surviving and choosing differently. What did you think of this story? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted or saved by an unexpected stranger? If this resonated with you, please share it. And if you want more family stories, revenge like this, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. I appreciate you being here. One final reminder, certain elements of this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes and to emphasize the lesson. What I hope you take away is the message, not just the details.